Good morning. Welcome to this first webcast accountability and performance meeting. I'm Jonathan Shepwards, the new Police and Crime Commissioner for Hertfordshire. I'm joined by Charlie Hall, the Chief Constable for Hertfordshire Constabulary. I'm just going to go through the purpose of the meeting and some housekeeping for the benefit of members of the public watching before we get into today's agenda. So the Police and Crime Commissioner has a statutory duty to hold the Chief Constable to account for the Constabulary's performance. That's always been done under my predecessor, but we're now going to be doing it through a monthly webcast meeting to provide greater public transparency of the PCC's role. So these meetings will discuss a range of crime and policing issues that matter to the public, and they'll be strategic and constructive in nature, both to provide reassurance where things are going well and provide scrutiny over areas where improvements can be made. And it's really important for me to say that the PCC does not interfere with the operational independence of police officers. So these meetings will not go into individual cases where there are established procedures for members of the public to raise any concerns through the complaints process through the PCC's office. Just in terms of some housekeeping, the meeting is being webcast and a recording will be made available later on the PCC website. For those members of the public watching live, you're very welcome. It's not possible to contribute to the meeting, and so the webcast is in watch-only mode, but very much hope you will find it useful. The agenda for today, firstly, I'm going to invite the Chief Constable to just give a bit of an overview of policing and crime in Hertfordshire, and then our agenda items for more discussion are Operation Hotspot and antisocial behaviour, violence against women and girls, call handling and digital contact, burglary and firearms licensing. Those are going to be the topics we're going to be covering today. So Chief Constable, thank you. Perhaps if I can just start by just inviting you to just give your assessment overall of policing and crime in Hertfordshire at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much, Jonathan. So where are we as a constabulary? I think perhaps if I'll start with the workforce, because as of yesterday, we've got 2,419 police officers across the county, which is the largest number of officers we've ever had in our history, and that number has grown considerably in the last 3 and 4 years because of injections in funding and police officer numbers. So that's a positive place. The workforce as a whole, it's not quite at its largest because we've in the last 10 years or so had to achieve some budget savings and things in other areas. But it's good that we've got the largest number of police officers. If we look at those officers, a number of those aren't necessarily still in training. So the workforce, we have a large number of relatively new in service officers who are still developing experience in their roles, and that presents some challenges for the force in terms of getting people trained up and getting those levels of experience where they wish to be. But I think some real positives for the next year or so as that experience develops. In terms of demands on the constabulary, they continue to build and grow, and we do have a number of functions across the whole constabulary, so not all of those officers will be invisible uniformed roles because of the nature of the way crime patterns change and society moves on. We necessarily have a number of specialist units to help us address some of those, and I think we'll talk about those later as we go on. An indication of that demand is on a daily basis. On average, we're attending just over 300 incidents every single day. Some of those will be emergency incidents that we'll attend on blue lights. Others will be more routine appointments for us to work through. But that is a significant demand for us to manage across a 24/7 period. And then in terms of crime demand, since the beginning of April, we tend to compare our performance years from the start of April. We are showing a slight increase in crime at present. That's around about 6% increase that we're seeing at the present point in time. That in part is because we in recent months have been doing a great deal of work to ensure that our crime recording processes are completely robust, and everything that gets reported to us in different ways completely makes it into the system. So some of that increase will be down to some tightening in some areas. And then if we look across what we call our criminal justice outcomes, which is where we investigate and be able to get a positive outcome from those, they are showing an increase as well, which is pleasing by 1%. That the rate that we report is at 13%, so it's still a way to go, and there's still work that we can do with that. But it is moving in the right direction with that. And we do actually compare ourselves. Every police force is set into a most similar family group, and we are assessed against 8 other, or the group contains 8 police forces, we being one of those. And when we look at that, our crime rate per head of population remains still the best. So we are in terms of, so it means our crime rate is the lowest overall across those 8 similar forces, and our outcomes level is currently at 6. There's some work that we still wish to do with the outcomes. I've got details as to what's happening against various crime categories within that wider basket, and some of those are showing some reductions. Others, which broadly reflects the focus we've put on the crime recording, have shown some increases as well within that. But the headline is overall, it's at the moment about 6% up the crime rate.
Thank you very much for that. That's really useful, and I think a lot of the public welcome the fact we've got more officers than ever before, but certainly recognise the point you've made around the kind of overall workforce, some of the challenges there as those officers get up to speed, and of course as demand changes and as the population grows, there are still going to be many of those challenges, and going out and about with the front line on a few occasions since I've been elected, it's really apparent some of those demands and indeed the real professionalism and hard work that's going into tackling them.
Yeah, and I think probably what I would add is that I'm proud of the workforce I've got, the work that they do. There's a huge amount of commitment across the whole force given to policing the county and the public. Some of the things they deal with are particularly tough and challenging and difficult. We don't always get it right, but more often than I think we get it right than we see, and that's sometimes not always reflected in some of the headlines that are grabbed in the media about policing, either locally or nationally. But there is an enormous amount of good work done, and I would encourage people listening or online, follow us on our Facebook and social media feeds, and you will see plenty of that and the positive difference that officers and staff and police staff are making across the county day in, day out.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go on to one of those areas where there's some really positive work being done on Operation Hotspot. So this is some funding that has come from the Home Office through my office to deliver an uplift in high visibility patrols in 26 antisocial behaviour and crime hotspots, often in town centres. As you say, crime is low in Hertfordshire, but there are still some areas where it's higher than average. So to just get into this a little bit more, perhaps if you could just talk me through how the Constabulary is operationalising hotspots and the approach that's being used to deliver that additional policing of those hotspot areas.
So the hotspot policing work is based on really sound academic research that shows if you show some high visibility patrolling at randomised times in areas that are subject to antisocial behaviour or crime, positive effect on reducing those. And that effectively says just 15-minute patrols at different times of the day. So it's not a fixed pattern, and it should be no more than 15 minutes, can then deliver some real positive outcomes for that. So we've absolutely adopted that with the funding that's been made available to help support that. And we are doing that all across the county. So we police the county based on what we call 10 community safety partnership areas. They mirror exactly the local authority boundaries, the district council boundaries across the county. And in each of those, we have identified at least one hotspot that we think will benefit from this work. And in some districts, they're up to 4, and making 26, I think it is, across the county as a whole. They have been identified by analytical work to look at the crime patterns, and we've done all the data to work through what that looks like. And we are now putting in place high visibility patrols on that randomised basis, so short periods across the day, in order to address that. And we've been running this since the start of April. At the moment, we've been able to identify almost 1,200 hours have gone into patrolling these spots. We are very carefully recording where the patrols, when they are taking place, so we'll be able to provide that data to you at the end of the process. Already, we've seen some positive results directly as a result of these patrols. So that dedicated patrolling has already led to 15 arrests, over 20 stop and searches taken place of individuals in those locations, and officers using various powers they have to address antisocial behaviour, which has been used 108 times so far in that first period. So there is, not only is there the visible patrols taking place, but there's evidence that officers are taking positive action to address the issues in those locations, as well as we work that through. And we're going to continue it through the summer into the autumn. We'll review the impact that it's having. Some of those hotspots, I am confident we will start to demonstrate are nowhere near as hot as they used to be, and that's got to be a positive for those communities. And we will also potentially bring on new hotspots as well as patterns change around that. But it feels a really positive initiative for us, and I'm sure it will, as it has done elsewhere from the academic research that's proved it, this will have only positive impacts in those areas. And I can assure people online, the areas we have chosen are genuinely the areas that are most prone to crime, antisocial behaviour across the county.
Yeah. Fantastic. That's really positive to hear some of those initial outcomes. And I've been out on a hotspot patrol with really excellent officers in Borehamwood to see that myself and how that's going. Look forward to going out with some others in the next few weeks. And it was really clear to me, some of the really good relationships developed by officers in those communities in terms of working with retailers on shoplifting, those sorts of things. So it was incredibly positive to see. Can I ask you just to share a bit more detail about some of the powers that officers are able to use when doing those additional patrols? You touched on a couple of the outcomes there, but if I could just ask for a bit more detail on.
Yeah, well, as I say, a lot of it is about the visibility. Clearly, we expect them to engage people. Visibility is not about driving through these hotspots in vehicles, it's being out on foot and speaking with people as well. Officers have a wide range of powers. Clearly, we can make arrests. We can stop and speak to people. Where officers have grounds, they will stop and search people, and that might be for weapons, it might be for stolen items, it might be because they feel they've got drugs. Not all of those searches will find things, but it's positive, proactive policing in that regard. And in terms of antisocial behaviour, some of the powers that they will use there, on occasions we may have dispersal orders in place, and we may ask people to leave a location if we feel that their presence there is likely to lead directly to antisocial behaviour in that regard. And in terms of particular offenders, there may be orders that we look to put in place to control their activities, and indeed people who have been through our custody system charged with offences bailed to court. we may apply particular bail conditions to them, and that might include not to associate with certain individuals or not to go to certain locations in order to control their offending through that. So, we look to a whole range of opportunities that there are to support these areas. And I think one of the things that marks out the hotspot is that this is done particularly successfully where you can work with other organisations and partners within that. So we are engaging things like street wardens. Our PCSOs are very active around this. We will speak with businesses in the local area as well, charitable groups, housing associations and the like, because working effectively in this way will be far more effective if we've got other organisations involved as well.
Absolutely. And part of that, there is funding as part of the bid for some local authority patrols.
Yes.
What progress is being made to work with local authority partners to get those?
So what we've asked is for each of the 26 hotspot areas, we've developed a hotspot plan. And that's been done locally, and the local chief inspectors and the teams involved with this have been asked very specifically to ensure they are engaging with local authorities and others around that, which does include so the randomised visibility that I talked about is really about a uniformed presence. Clearly, policing through PCSO specials officers will provide a lot of that, but it doesn't need to just be ourselves. It might be street wardens. It could be other uniformed presence. And we are engaging with those authorities to encourage them to do a very similar thing. And of course, often their teams are nearby or in and around the locations that we've identified, because very frequently these are typically town centres or housing estates, parks, as to the locations that we've identified.
Thank you. Just then going back to the outcomes, so you talked about expecting to be able to drive down crime and antisocial behaviour in many of those hotspots, which is exactly what we want to see. One of the questions that I've had raised by the public is when that just move it. Talk me through the academic research around that. Some of it's around the specific locations, isn't it?
It is, and sometimes the reason locations are hotspots is because of that location, because it is a natural meeting place, perhaps for people. Because of the way it's designed. And I know there's often a fear that activities such as this will simply displace it elsewhere. And I think the academic research tends to say that doesn't always occur. In fact, frequently it doesn't occur. And they are real reductions, and they become real reductions because it's the hotspot place itself that attracts the behaviour, and other places nearby, because of their design and location, things are unlikely to attract the same behaviour in that space. So we are going to monitor this really carefully. We've got the data. We're able to map where we can see those hotspots. We will look to see how the intensity of those hotspots reduces by tracking things like our crime data, our antisocial behaviour data, and other indicators in that way. But we will definitely be on the lookout for any potential that this is displaced. And in the vast majority of cases, I do not expect to see much of any evidence of that coming through. But if we do see it, as I said at the start, we'll just adjust our activity, maybe extend the hotspot area or refocus it into another area to ensure that we are not just moving these issues around.
Great, thank you. There's been some really good work done across the Constabulary to get this mobilised since the funding was available. And my understanding from the data I've seen, there is a bit of an imbalance between different community safety partnerships, different districts, in terms of the number of patrols that have been able to be carried out so far. Can you just talk me through what work's being done to get those to a kind of broadly equal distribution across the county?
Yeah, so it is, as we described, we've been at it 3 months. Whenever you introduce something like this, you need to build up the momentum, energy and everything within the constabulary to do that. Some of our areas have absolutely grabbed it and run with it. Some will feel they have a little bit more challenging around being able to dedicate the resources to that. So we've put in place a dedicated manager to manage this process across the whole constabulary. So their job is to ensure that those areas that maybe don't appear to be putting quite so much attention into it, we're working with them to see how that can be done, how we can help with their resourcing profile, and that might be through encouraging special constables to come in and assist, deploying PCSOs in that way as well. And the other thing we are doing is we're very shortly got a new digital solution that will sit on officers' mobile phones, so they'll be able to very clearly show exactly where those officers have been across the force and record when they've been in the hotspot areas as well. And I believe that will I'm sure show that there's probably more patrolling taking place than we're actually capturing through the methods that we've got at the moment in those locations, and it will help indicate to those officers that that's where we expect them to be when they're not deployed on other tasks.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, I think really important to remember this is all about additional activity on top of what's happening day to day, which will of course involve patrols in many of these areas routinely. Touched upon the number of hours that have been delivered so far, very encouraging. My understanding is that for the amount of money we've got for Hertfordshire, the Home Office would expect between about 9,000 and 13,000 hours across the year. Obviously, early days. Are you confident that target will be achievable over the course of the year?
Well, I'm very optimistic we'll achieve it, and we'll certainly be pushing very high. And this is going to run throughout the whole year, and we will be targeting that time in there. And I want to draw all the money down, and the money not only will pay for overtime for officers trying to take this work, but also the problem-solving activities that we can put into it. Maybe some CCTV, for example, maybe some redesign of the locations so that we can design out the crime, because ultimately I would want to be able to get away from needing to constantly patrol these areas and develop the infrastructure around the locations such that they are able in the long run to police themselves. But I recognise to do that, initially we need to be in there and be very visible to drive out the issues.
Thank you. My final question then on this topic, and you referred to it just there, is that a lot of the additional patrols are overtime funded. So how's that going in terms of officers' existing workloads? Because obviously we're asking officers to do extra, to do more. In terms of the workforce, how's that going in terms of people being able to do it and being supported to do that?
Yeah, well, the organisation is busy. There is plenty to do around that, and we need to keep a balance across things that we're responsible for. One reason why this initiative is being delivered considerably through the use of overtime, and as I say, it's not just police officers. We can use our police community support officers to do this. And use some overtime there. We can encourage our special constabulary to come in and support with us, and indeed our partner organisations who have a uniform presence in that way as well. And we will continue to work and offer that. But I'm also keen that through the new technology we have, that where officers in the course of their normal shift have opportunities and downtime, and if there's a question mark as to where should I patrol now, because actually I've not just been deployed to something and I do have some time, and these are naturally the locations we expect people to gravitate back to, and we will be able to monitor that through the software, and indeed encourage officers to spend some random. It's only 15 minutes, but it is out on foot, so we do expect them to do that, and they're asking them to work that way.
Great, thank you very much. Really positive progress being made on that, and looking forward to seeing how that goes through the rest of the year. Thank you. I'm going to move on to our next agenda item now, on violence against women and girls, which is a key priority area. I know for the Constabulary, for me, is the PCC. Obviously, it's a strategic policing requirement from the Home Office. Women have an absolute right to be safe in Hertfordshire. They would all agree on that. But a significant amount of Constabulary's demands in these kinds of offences. Could you start off by talking me through how the Constabulary is tackling violence against women and girls offences?
Certainly. As you rightly say, this was a really important priority for us, not only here but nationally. And we've all seen some of the headlines around this. Sadly, this does make up a fairly sizable proportion of our demand, and we recognise we need to be able to drive the offending down and offer more safety and reassurance to women and girls through this. So it's very squarely set as a priority in what we call our force control strategy, which sets out the key areas that the policing in Hertfordshire should be prioritising. This is right in the middle of that, and there's nobody in the force who can or should be under any doubt that this is a clear expectation for them. So whichever part of the organisation you are in delivering operational service, you will be well aware that this is an area that they expect to pay attention to. And indeed, over the last few weeks, I've been meeting large sections of the workforce, 500 or so at the time, trying to cover everybody effectively who works for us. And we've spent a really good amount of time talking about expectations and how to deal with this. So in addition to it being everybody's priority in that regard, we've also got a number of specialist dedicated units whose full-time attention pretty much is on addressing violence against women and girls, and probably the most notable of those would be our domestic abuse investigation safeguarding unit, DASU. The vast majority of cases that they deal with through there are where women and girls are identifying as the victims of these cases. We've got that dedicated unit together because we recognise that investigating these cases, offering the safeguarding advice, is a pretty specialist role. So we've got detectives in there who specialise in that work. Similarly, we've got our sexual offences investigation team, another completely dedicated team to doing this work as well, that looks at sexual offending, which sadly, again, victims are disproportionately women and girls in that space. And then more broadly than that, we've got our safeguarding teams, and we've developed clear policies around how we work with that. We've got a violence against women and girls board that meets quarterly to check the progress across all our teams as to what the trend information is looking like and how we're delivering against that. And we are using and drawing upon the national work that's taking place as well, and the good practice that's being identified elsewhere to ensure that we adopt that pretty quickly in terms of delivering that to help safeguard people, drive down this offending. So, I think the reassurance I would give is, this is talked about on a daily basis in the Constabulary, and it is a really strong focus for us. Within that, there's a lot of work we do with partner organisations as well, because it's not just what the Constabulary does, but it's also where the local authorities might be on this, where some of the charitable groups are. It's violence against women and girls is a broader issue than just what we do in policing. And ideally, I want to get to a space where we prevent this, safeguard women and girls, and ensure that they can live their lives without fear of being harassed, being subject to violence and crime. And that's where we want to get to, which is why working with other organisations is important in this space as well.
Thank you. I completely agree with that, and I think there's a much wider societal issue, isn't there? That goes beyond policing, and a huge responsibility across public services to lean into this area to try and do that preventative work, and some really positive work being done in Hertfordshire already, both in terms of safeguarding, but also trying to work with perpetrators as well, which is positive to see. Can you talk me through some of the trends in offences and charge rates at the moment for some of those key offence groups?
Yeah, and this is not straightforward because the way we record crimes is against Home Office crime categories, and they don't specifically set out a violence against women and girls category, because the offending there could be captured under many different crime headings, and violent crimes, harassment offences, public order offences, and the like. So, but we do try and track across all our crime categories where it appears that it's an offence or a report to us that would fit in the violence against women and girls sort of broader grouping within that. And when we do that, it looks like within the Constabulary we are recording in the region of 1,000 offences per month that relate to violence against women and girls. And that sounds like a big number. It is a big number. It's far too big for what we would wish to see. If we track that over 5 years, it has reduced slightly. It's still got a long way to go, but the figure within that basket is not quite as significant as it was. But 1,000 is still a lot. Within those, there will be a lot of what we call our safeguarding work that takes place to try and protect victims, to try and encourage them to follow the criminal justice process through. Not all of our victims will wish to do that. And if they don't, we absolutely work and ensure there's some safeguarding activity that's wrapped around them to try and prevent them becoming or continuing to be victims in that way. And in terms of that figure, the number that we are formally managing to charge and get before a court, it sits just above 5% at the moment. That's nowhere near sufficient. I want to drive that further, but there's a whole complex set of reasons behind why that can be challenging and difficult to get those cases before a court. But I would encourage any woman or girl who experiences these issues to report them to us, even if it's ultimately not your wish to get before a court. We might talk to you and see, are there other ways in which we can do that? And in some cases, we're able to pursue what we would call victim not supported prosecutions, where we can take the decision and the evidence is such that we are able to put it before the court without the victim's involvement as such. And we think that's important because we do know there are a cohort of people, sadly, who do tend to move from one victim to another, and it's important we get some grip around those. But at the very least, we will risk assess all of those situations and take appropriate safeguarding action.
Thank you. That's really useful, and really stark figures actually. 1,000 offences a month is horrendous, and something that we'll need to keep a really close eye on. The Constabulary is really focused on trying to drive those down and drive the charge rates up. But a real priority for me will be part of the policing crime plan later in the year. I want to pick up on you just referred there to some of that pattern of behaviour and offending. How are repeat patterns of abusive behaviour amongst perpetrators being identified and addressed?
Well, we collect a lot of data in the organisation, and I've got an intelligence team that sits, an analytical team, and one of the things I do is work through that data as well. Also, when people call into us, into the control room, one of the checks that we will do is, well, one, we will ask them, are you or have you experienced behaviour like this previously? But we will also check against our systems for previous calls that we've had commenced, even if an individual doesn't declare that. We would hopefully be able to show that on our system. One of the things that we do with these is undertake, certainly for domestic disputes, is we use a risk assessment tool, domestic abuse risk assessment process, which is a set of questions that we work through with people who are reporting victims to understand the nature of what is going on, the nature of the relationship, whether there has been previous abuse within that, whether there are children in their home, and that is used to assess risk. Certainly a factor in there is this happening on a repeated basis? What vulnerabilities are there for the individual as well? And using all of that, we undertake a risk assessment, and that the results of that risk assessment then help to determine what our further action looks like, how we might engage other organisations to come in and support and deal with the issues that we are seeing. And that might be as a result of assaults, it might be as a result of harassments. And within those figures that I talked about, the 1,000 will also be breaches of orders that we've put in place to try and protect and safeguard victims. I might be able to talk about those in a little while as to what they look like as well. So we definitely try and identify where there are repeat cases, where this is an ongoing pattern of behaviour. And of course, we recognise very often it has been. And the first time it comes to police's notice is usually not the first time this behaviour has been happening to that individual.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we'll come on to some of the sort of protective orders in a moment. I wanted to pick up on the work being done to support victims through the criminal justice system and the what's referred to as the attrition rate, not necessarily the best description, but the rate at which a victim, for whatever reason, through the process, and often we're talking about delays in the course as much as anything that is within the control of policing, who end up withdrawing from a prosecution or not continuing. Historically, that figure in Hertfordshire has been quite high. What work from a policing point of view, and perhaps more broadly through the criminal justice system, is being done to try and reduce that and to support victims through that process?
Yeah, it can be an issue in this area in particular. I think we all recognise there's often a whole host of emotions bound up in some of these cases. The DASU team, part of their work is to very actively engage and support and keep victims informed as to what's happening through the process, and offer encouragement, explanation of what a court process may look like, and to keep them engaged and able to continue through to court if necessary. And they do call and speak to victims on a very regular basis. Do that. In addition to that, we've got a victim services team, which is a number of officers that regularly ring to provide updates, to understand any concerns or vulnerabilities individuals may have, to put them in touch with other charitable groups and organisations who can support them, who want to show some understanding as to the situation they're in and what's been happening to them. And we're active in that area, running that. And we're also blessed with a very good victim scheme under the banner of Beacon in the county, which is something I know that you and your office support and fund. And there's a really wide range of services available through Beacon to support victims, and including we've recently set up, slightly off the victim side, working with an organisation to deliver a scheme for perpetrators as well, because we recognise that some of these perpetrators, whilst they are offending, they also have some issues themselves that we can usefully try and work with to reduce the likelihood of them continuing to reoffend, be that anger issues, drug and alcohol issues, mental health issues, whatever it is. Some of our offenders we know recognise they have some issues and need some help to work through that. So we're trying to do that as well. I have to say, one of the complications we've got is, it's been well documented for some time now that there are delays in getting some things into court, given the backlogs that exist in the wider court system. That can make it quite problematic for us to keep people engaged with these processes, focused on keeping the case going through to court. And it would certainly help us hugely if some of those backlogs could be reduced so that we can get cases more swiftly before the courts than we're able to in some cases presently.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen some of that work through the victim services team and Beacon at some point in introductory meetings, and really positive stories and evidence there in terms of the impact that's having on victims. So really welcome. Thank you. I want to move on then to some of the protective orders, disclosure schemes that are available to the Constabulary to put some of that safeguarding around victims. The first one I wanted to pull out is around the use of domestic violence protection orders. First, just for the benefit of the public watching, can you just talk me through what the purpose of one of those orders might be from a policing point of view?
Yeah, so domestic violence protection order we would consider using in a domestic abuse case where it is felt that the victim in that case needs some space from the person who is committing offences or perpetrating against them. And the reason they might need that space is in order to allow them to think about the relationship that they've been in, what they wish to do going forward, and potentially give them space to reset their life and perhaps then decide to move away from that relationship. That's very difficult to do if the person who has been committing offences against you or perpetrating you or using controlling coercive behaviour on you is still in the same house as you. So we can apply on behalf of the victims through the court process for a domestic violence protection order, which puts conditions on it, which usually is to keep away from the victim, not enter certain locations for a period of 28 days. And it's that 28-day period that then gives that space for individuals to think about that. And it's been shown around the country that is really valuable and is a very beneficial tool to help support people make those decisions going forwards that otherwise can be really difficult.
Yeah, thank you. The last inspection of Hertfordshire Constabulary identified quite a low use of those orders. That was back in 2022, where I think the use was lowest nationally. I know quite a bit of progress has been made to improve that. Can you just talk me through the progress that's been made over the last couple of years? Yeah,
so there were some other orders that we were using previously, but I recognise that those orders are not quite as suitable. So there were protections being put in place, but we've recognised we've got to move more around this. So we've put some dedicated resourcing into our domestic abuse investigating safeguarding unit to coordinate this and do this and ensure that all our investigators understand how to apply for these orders and can identify the cases where they may be most suitable. And our numbers have changed quite significantly since that. So we did start this work last year, so we did see an uptick last year. So last year we managed to put in the case of 12 months, 156 of these orders were put in place. That's accelerated it even further since January of this year. So in the first 6 months of this year, we've now put in another 177 orders in place. And we fully expect that will continue. So, on that current rate by the end of this full 12 months, I would expect we will have more than doubled the number that we applied in the previous 12 months. I think the other thing that's important is that once these orders are in place, we do look to enforce and check. So we do some checks within that 28-day period to make sure people aren't breaching the order that's been placed before them. If they do, we can arrest and can put them back before the court, where they may get fined. And for individuals who persistently breach these, occasionally they will get some custodial time through that as well. And that's another important thing, that once the order's in place, we actually check and monitor that it's being complied against, and if it's not, that we take action in addition to that. And then there's a whole range of other orders that are available to us as well, and I've asked the team to ensure that we are using those productively, and we're seeing our use of other orders come up as well, which includes, for example, we've now got 25 stalking protection orders in place to protect individuals who have reported that they've been subject to stalking type behaviours, and we do that where we feel it's necessary to help protect them.
Great, thank you, and really pleasing to see the direction of travel there on DVPOs. So that's quite a significant increase on what the inspectorate highlighted in 2022. So that's really positive as a direction of travel. In terms of the breach rate, it's positive to hear that that's monitored. How does that compare nationally in terms of breaches? Is that work that's going into to monitor, is that paying dividends in terms of ensuring those orders aren't being breached?
Yeah, so I've not got any comparison data with me as to what that looks like compared to the national picture, so I can't give a definitive answer around that. What I can say is there are proactive checks that are taking place. We are driving that. We are recording that data. There have been breaches, as I've said. We have made arrests. We have been back before the courts as a result of that. And I think it's important we do that for the credibility of the order, and the victim is able to say not only does the order exist, but actually when it's breached, police are taking action. And are doing that because the purpose is to give that space, and if the offender is going to breach that order, or the person subject to the order, then we need to be prepared to take action to ensure that it can achieve what it's designed to do.
Great, thank you. And then the other area that I wanted to just ask about here is around Clare's Law, which is a disclosure scheme rather than an order. And can you just talk me through the purpose of that for the public?
Yeah, so Clare's Law is named directly after an individual who lost their life through domestic abuse and a relationship with somebody who had a previous history that that individual did not know about. That put in place something called Clare's Law, which enables people to apply to the police and ask about the background of a new individual they may have entered a relationship with, and that's intended to help safeguard them. And if there are things that they should be aware of about previous offending or their involvement in abusive relationships, we can, in some circumstances, disclose some details to them, again, to enable them to make some choice about those relationships, to go in eyes wide open as to who that individual is and whether they wish to continue those relationships. If not, and if so, how they're going to do that. So we do have a number of applications that come in. I think we would wish for people to make use of that scheme. There are details on our website that explains how to do that. And not in every case will we disclose. We will make a decision as to whether disclosure is appropriate or not, and to what extent we disclose. But clearly that information could be useful for people. And we recognise we need to do more with this. And we've recently put strengthen the team that's in place, put more resources in to ensure that we can process these applications quickly and get the information back to people where it's relevant.
Thank you. And I think that's really key in terms of the timeliness of that. In terms of that awareness piece, what's the Constabulary doing proactively to promote public awareness of Clare's law and ability for people to apply for that information from the Constabulary where appropriate?
Yeah, so I think there is lots of information generally out there. We've got information available, and I'll absolutely check that our web pages are really proficient with that. And I think it's a useful prompt that I know our media and comms team have promoted this in the past, and I'll take back and ensure it's continuing to regularly be promoted on our social media and other feeds. I mean, certainly our victim services team and the like, this would be something that I would fully expect them to be discussing with people that we know are reporting offences to us to ensure that they're aware of their right to ask for this information under Clare's law.
Lovely, thank you. The final area under this item, I wanted to ask about Project Vigilance, which is some work to target perpetrators of sexually predatory behaviour in the nighttime economy, in particular. Can you just talk me through that in a bit more detail, how that's working in Hertfordshire, what impact is being seen through that work?
So Project Vigilant is about providing protection into nighttime economy areas where we know that women and girls sometimes are targeted and approached and can be associated with some of the offences that we've been speaking about. So this is about how do we identify potential perpetrators and provide some additional protections to those people that are out enjoying the nighttime economy, as they absolutely should be able to do without fear of being approached, stalked, harassed by people, predominantly men, who might be looking to take advantage of opportunities in the nighttime economy. So what we do under Project Vigilant, we've trained up a number of officers in what to look out for, what are the concerning behaviours that we might see from people in and around night pubs, clubs, outside on the street, taxi ranks and things. And we deploy those trained officers both in plain clothes and some uniform patrols as well, and encouraging officers to be on the lookout for these individuals. And then when they see them, when they think they are seeing people who are lurking around, displaying concerning behaviours, that they intervene, find out why those people are there, take action as necessary, find out who those individuals are through that. And that has been occurring across. We launched it initially in Watford, so it's had its most significant focus in Watford, but we're now looking to take that to other places across the county as well, particularly those areas that we know have nighttime economy areas. So, that's looking into East Herts, the Hertford area, and Stevenage, and into North Herts as well. And the teams have intervened. They've spoken to many people through that. Not everybody's identified as a concern, clearly, but some have been. And we have identified certainly a small number of people that we feel really should not be there, and their motives for being there are very questionable.
Great, thank you. Really positive to hear that proactive work being done. And final question before we move on to the next topic is you've referred a few times to some of the specialist teams involved in this work, and it's not the easiest of work in placing it, is it? So how are those teams being supported to be effective and how their well-being is being looked after?
Sure, and yes, some of the cases I hear about are particularly difficult. Yeah. There is often a lot of emotion wrapped up with this as well, and it can be quite draining for officers when day in, day out, they're dealing with cases like this and working that through. So, that's, recognising for the victims and the individuals involved, clearly they are completely closely associated with that, and the emotion and everything and the support they need is absolutely paramount. But to some extent, the officers can feel some of that as well. So we've got a well-defined welfare, well-being offering in the force for the whole workforce. Effectively, we do target that in specifically to certain roles and teams that we know may experience the stresses of this more routinely. Certainly our day suit team would be one of them. Our sewing team would be one of them. Our child protection teams is definitely another area where we would do that. We've got an extensive network of wellbeing officers, so we've trained a number of officers to support and look out for some of the signs that somebody's maybe finding difficult and struggling, and then we can refer into our occupational health services and manage their wellbeing through that as well. So whilst clearly we need to support the public and people who are victims of these offences, we make sure we don't turn a blind eye to the officers themselves as well, because it can be distressing for them, albeit in a different way, but hearing about what people in the community have been going through and suffering.
Thank you. I'm going to move on now to call handling, digital contact, and that kind of first response to the public. It's from the member of the public's point of view, so often the first interaction they'll have with the constabulary scenario of really significant demands into the organisation. Can you just give me a summary of current performance around call handling? I know there's a lot of work being done around this area.
Yeah, so our force control room is often the first point of contact for members of the public, particularly those who will contact us by phone or indeed other digital media. Our two primary routes is the 999 system for the most urgent calls where police are effectively needed pretty much immediately. And we aim to answer those calls within 10 seconds from the point at which they start ringing in our control room. For year to date, when I say year to date, this is from the beginning of April, we have received in that, it was 3 months, the data that I've got here. In that time, we have received 47,000, just over 47,000 999 calls into the room. I think that averages out around about 500 a day. Sometimes it tops 600 on busy days. Other days it might be less than that. So it's a really significant number of nines calls in there. So we aim to pick them up within 10 seconds. At the moment, our mean time for doing that is we're getting to them in 7 seconds. And we answer on current performance 85% within the 10-second time. They unhelpfully don't tend to come in neatly spaced throughout the day. Because of the nature of incidents occurring, often they come in peaks, and that can make it difficult to get to every single call. When the lines suddenly light up and it's apparent it might be a collision on the motorway or something like that, where many people will call us, and that can make it difficult to get to everyone. But we do look to answer every single one, and of course, until we answer it, we don't quite know what the caller's calling in about. And on occasions, we will already be aware or maybe already attending. A very small number do abandon. And that figure at the moment is 0.4% of the calls get abandoned before we manage to answer them after that 10-second window. What we do with those calls, we make a point of calling back to understand what the nature of the call was. On some occasions, it's a mistaken call. Sometimes it's somebody's maybe dialed us in their pocket, or children have called, so we do recognise that, but we think it's important that we do need to call back, particularly if, linking perhaps to a domestic abuse situation where somebody may be being controlled and the phone's been taken off them and hung up. It's really important we understand if that is the case in those cases. So we'll do all that. On our other call lines, so our standard number is the 101 number, so that's our non-urgent call number. We've so far since the start of April, for the first 3 months, we received just over 67,000 calls through that route. These are not prioritised in quite the same way. We look to get to the 9s first, but we do look to answer those calls within 90 seconds. And at the moment, we're answering 70% of those calls within a 90-second period. And we've also look within those calls coming in. If you do dial in on that number, you will encounter, unless we answer it immediately, you will encounter our recorded message, our pre-recorded guidance. Within that, it will give you some information about, ask you about the nature of the call and give you some options as to how you may be able to deal with the issue that you're calling in about in a different way without speaking to, maybe through our website, it may be using the reporting tools that are available on our website. It may be, and we do get a good number of calls come in about people who have received tickets from speed cameras or things like that, and we've used that opportunity to direct your call to other parts of the organisation that can more directly answer that to ensure that we manage our guidance effectively.
Thank you. That's very useful. So just going back to the 999 call. So mean time 7 seconds. 85% answered in 10, which is the target. So that suggests that obviously as that demand fluctuates, there's a fair number of calls being answered very, very quickly, which is great, and a fair number of calls that are going over the 10 seconds target to get to that average of 7. So what's being done as far as is possible to try and map resourcing to that demand, obviously given that demand is fluctuating?
We do a lot of work in the control room. We've got it's a data-rich environment, and we're able to map broadly the profile as to when the calls tend to come in across a 24-hour period. And the call volumes tend to increase late afternoon into the evening, reaching a peak often about 9, 10 at night, changes slightly through the weekends. And then it drops away quite sharply through the night time. And we use that data to profile our resourcing as to when we put more resources into the room to be able to answer those calls. What is less easy is being able to predict exactly when the spikes in calls are coming in, because clearly they are led by incidents that happen. And on a few occasions, the 9s calls do have a more significant delay in getting to, and that will usually be because we've got a sudden peak of calls that have come in that can make it difficult to find a resource to pick absolutely every single one of them up through that. But as I say, they do all get answered or called back if we do not get to them through that. If you go into the room, there's a board that very clearly displays on the wall that shows how many are in the queue, how many are waiting to be answered, and what the pickup rate is on those. And that's intended to assist people in the room to see when there are calls that are looking to stack. And the supervisors in the room are then able to start diverting call handlers to prioritise the 9s calls at that point. And it often will mean, if you are calling in on 101 and you happen to be calling in at a point where we are receiving a peak of 9s calls, the staff in the room will absolutely prioritise answering those 9s calls before the 101. And I know it can be frustrating, but it sometimes might mean a slightly longer wait on the 101 call as we pick the 9s calls up.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of then getting to that 90% target in 10 seconds on 999, looking into the data, there's been quite a lot of progress in terms of driving that up. So go back a year or two, and that figure would have been in the 70%, sort of mid 80s. And so Hertfordshire's been improving. Of course, what's been happening is that other forces have also been improving, and so our benchmarking rate, it looks from the data, has actually fallen back a little bit in terms of where we sit with other forces. So what's being done to try and get that back up in terms of where we sit compared to other forces?
Yeah, well, the call volumes are up, which makes it more challenging. We've got to get the resourcing into the room, and filling those slots, getting people appropriately trained is an absolute focus. There's a lot of people up in that room. We do have a reasonable amount of turnover of staff each year as well, and we've recently put some police officer posts into the room to help support as well, and they are getting trained. There is a seasonal profile to the calls as well, and this time of year, through the summer periods, we do experience a higher call volume than we do through the autumn, winter months. So I would fully expect that performance that I've reported as we work through the autumn and the winter will look even stronger through there. Clearly, we try and take out of that call volume the calls that are inappropriate to come through the Nines route. We encourage our call takers to deal with calls as quickly and efficiently as they possibly can to free themselves up. And we've also done a lot of work, as I say, to try and reduce the volume of 101 calls coming through by diverting calls that do not need to be answered by the 101 call takers, put them to appropriate points in the organisation. So, they would include our cameras, tickets and collisions team, who have a high volume of calls, and we've been pretty successful at being able to get those off to people who are calling because they want to speak to a specific individual or officer, and so we can divert those to the appropriate extension numbers as well into HR teams if people are ringing up about recruitment issues, and that all helps reduce the volume in the room, which is partly why we've seen the performance coming through in the way that you've described, and I definitely want that to continue.
Thank you. And one of the parts of the control room is the rapid video response team, to particularly support domestic abuse related calls. Can you just talk me through that service and how that's helping victims and helping the constabulary start to deal with those kinds of reports?
Yeah, so we've got a small team that sits in the control room that we call our rapid video response team. They are picking up some inquiries, interviews with people who are calling in primarily to report domestic abuse cases. So there's a very careful risk assessment and triage that takes place in the control room. So this won't be incidents that are happening there and then.
Yeah.
It won't be instances where police officers need to get there to deal with the situation on the spot. They will always be prioritised and officers formally deployed. But this might be people who are reporting things that have happened to them perhaps the previous day and are not subject to immediate risk and threat. Prior to having the rapid video response team, we would look to then arrange to go and see them, and it may happen a few hours later. On occasions, it may not happen that same day. And we know that if we're not able to take accounts at the point at which they call in, some of those people reporting, the victims, decide that they don't wish to follow through. Yeah. They've changed their mind, or indeed the person, the offending perpetrator against them, has spoken to them and persuaded them not to pursue the line of action they had. So we've put the rapid video response team in and says, actually, we can deal with this in a different way. If you've got a broadband link and a smartphone or something like that, we can undertake a video interview with you here and now. and the team sitting there at their terminals and they speak to people across the video link and take the account as to what's happened at the point at which they've effectively called in. It's fresh in their mind and they are wanting to speak to police, and that's proving really effective in doing that. We then will look to investigate that, allocate that out. Arrests are sometimes made on the back of those accounts coming in, and that's effectively how the system's worked. It's helpfully changed where some of the workloads sit in the Constabulary as well, but most importantly, it means a prompter, swifter service is being given to those victims.
Yeah, fantastic, and I think really positive to have that specialism in the control room. I think probably Constabulary ahead of the game actually in doing that, which is really good to see. I'm going to move now on to residential burglary, which is one of those crimes that is kind of uppermost in the public mind. Yes, it's a really awful crime that goes to the heart of people's absolute right to feel safe in their own home. Burglary in Hertfordshire is low compared to national figures, but I know from looking at the data that there are some hotspots and some areas of the district where offences are going up a little bit. Can you talk me through how the Constabulary is tackling residential burglary from a starting point?
Yeah, certainly residential burglary, I would agree, is a particularly invasive crime, and it absolutely needs tackling. It makes people feel unsafe in their own homes, and it's a complete invasion of privacy and an individual's home is a castle, isn't it? And if you've had somebody come into that and steal things, that's particularly abhorrent. Our rate generally, talked about our most similar group of forces, looks positive in that comparison. It has come down a considerable amount over recent years. So the rate of house burglary is much less than it would have been 10, 15 years ago, which is really positive. But I recognise we've still got to keep bearing down on it. So in terms of numbers across the Constabulary, we record house burglary, home burglary at the rate of approximately 4 per day across the whole county. And often when we ask members of the public how many residential burglaries do you think there would be, they would quote a number far in excess of that. But 4 a day is still 4 people's homes that have been broken into, and that is for too many in that regard. So we have a policy of attending all of those. And we also then would refer all of those on to our scenes of crime teams as well. And the expectation would be that our scenes of crime teams would attend all of those to look for forensic capture, to try and identify who the individual responsible would be. I expect the teams to be undertaking house-to-house inquiries, to be looking to capture if there's CCTV evidence or ring doorbell footage, that sort of thing that can help us with that. And we allocate these to detectives to investigate. And quite often we will find that they come in little series, often associated with one or a very small number of offenders, some of whom become very prolific at these offences, and we will use all our intelligence assets to try and identify who these individuals are and track them down. Interestingly, this is often not what the public would think. The vast majority of these offences take place during daytime, they're not overnight. A small number are overnight, but far more of these are actually occurring during the day within that. And we continue to focus on it.
Yeah. Thank you. And can you talk me through how the Constabulary is taking a prevention first approach in terms of trying to reduce burglary and in particular prevent repeat victimisation?
Yeah, so we do look at, some people do suffer more than one burglary in this case. So we do look at that data, understand what that looks like. We have officers and staff who are able to give advice to homeowners around reasonable precautions they might be able to take. Most of those will be fairly well known to lots of people, window locks and alarms, lighting, ring doorbells and video doorbells have been hugely effective, I think. And one of the positives of recent years is there is a lot more availability of video footage out as people install their own camera systems, and that's definitely used in that regard. Every year we run something called Operation Guardian, which is about all of our policing areas putting in place guardian plans, as we call them, and that's particularly to protect against house burglary, especially as we move into the autumn period as the nights draw in and it gets darker of an evening. Our house burglaries over many, many years have shown that becomes a more vulnerable time as the cover of darkness in late afternoon and early evening makes it easier for people to commit those offences without being seen. So we look to, through those guardian plans, target our most prolific offenders, provide crime prevention advice to the community at large, but in particular those areas that our data is showing are more vulnerable, which would include repeat victims and other homeowners.
Thank you. I wanted to ask particularly around the kind of disproportionality of victims across different communities. So quite a lot of correspondence around Hertfordshire Park and some of the burglaries there earlier this year. And the data that my office has been able to look at shows that in that ward, 23% of the population are of Asian background, but 47% of burglary victims are Asian background. And so how is that prevention work and that preventing victimisation work and that engagement work reflecting those demographics and how different communities are perhaps being more impacted by this kind of crime?
Yeah, so we do look at the data closely, and you're right that across the county at different times, we sometimes see some spikes in offending that takes place, and that might be because of particular communities. Often it's because particular offenders have maybe been released from custodial sentences, and we need to address that. So as we sit here at the moment, of the 10 policing areas that I've got, 7 are showing reductions in residential burglary offences, which is really positive on the previous year. 1 is completely unchanged, it's exactly the same as it was, and 2 of the 10 have shown increases. 1 slight increase in the Three Rivers area, which includes Collectors Park that we've just described, is the one that is unfortunately standing out and is showing a more notable increase. And it may well be that trend that you've just identified at Carpenter's Park that is responsible for that. So we look at the data, do analyse it, the problem-solving plans that we've got in place, then look to feed off that. And certainly regarding Asian communities as described, there is a package of crime prevention advice that we're able to provide into those communities as well, to address some of the risk factors that often are present in particular communities. And I will actually, as you mentioned, that particularly take that away and ensure that is being done in the Carpenter's Park area, but also that we're looking very closely as to who the offenders may be and getting those arrested and brought to justice. Great,
thank you very much for that. I'm going to move on then to our final topic, which is firearms licensing. So this is a collaborated service between Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire and Hertfordshire, and has been, I know, subject to quite a bit of national change following the tragic shootings in Plymouth in 2021. And some of those changes are driving significantly longer processing times for renewals of firearm and shotgun certificates, which has driven quite a bit of public correspondence. So can you talk me through how the Constabulary is responding to those national policy changes and trying to address those processing times?
Yeah. As you say, we do have a collaborative unit. I have required it to go through some fairly significant changes in the way it operates in the last 3 years as a result of some of those policy changes that you've described, which really come following the tragic shooting that you will recall in Plymouth in 2021. And it was apparent that the firearms and shotgun licensing regime needed to be tightened up considerably, and there was changes in the national guidance that is given to policing around how those units operate. There was the coroner's inquest findings and some very clear recommendations that came out from that around firearms licensing. There's certainly been intervention from the Home Office about expectations around that, which has all led to us considerably tightening up how those processes operate through there. And I do recognise that what that's really done is move the way that we operate from what previously would be probably best described as an administrative way of processing the applications for certificates through to grants of certificates. And actually what we're now doing is being much more investigative and inquiring around the applications that are being made and about the reasons for those applications, and ensuring that the people that are applying are fit and proper people to be able to grant certificates for owning and operating using shotguns or firearms more generally. So the level of professional curiosity that my teams are now putting into these applications is far higher than was done previously, and there's an extensive range of checks that are done to ensure that when we grant a certificate for people to have firearms, we are confident that that's an appropriate grant through there. The sort of flip side of that, unfortunately, is it does mean this process is taking longer, and the timescales are longer through that. And I know that's been a frustration for many in the community around that. In response to that, we have put additional resources into the team. So we've increased the resourcing in there by 50%. And those resources are pretty much in there now to try and make the process quicker. But I remain really clear that the most important thing I need that team to do is to be able to demonstrate to me that they are making good quality decisions through there, and that they're not simply making decisions that are expedient in order to get the work off the desk. I'm not prepared to accept a really fast decision that's been a poor quality decision, and then that has consequences for the community going forward. So we prioritise the quality on that. As a result of that, we have seen appeal cases increase. So there is a route through for any refusals, and we are refusing more and more certificates than we ever had. As a result, there is an appeal for people through to the Crown Court of the decision making that the police have made, and we've had a significant number of cases. So there's 45 cases that we've had sort of go through that route. In all but 2 cases so far, the court has upheld the decision that we've made not to renew or grant certificates in that way. I also recognise that some of the applicants require their firearms or shotguns for professional purposes, work purposes, and the like. And we do identify those and look to prioritise those, and they get priority over those applications that are otherwise perhaps just for leisure purposes. But I also recognise it would be frustrating for anybody who's on the end and waiting. And our times at the moment, they have been increasing a little bit. So For renewals, so people who are looking to renew an existing certificate, they clearly already have firearms. So we prioritise those above applications for new certificates. So there will be people who not yet to get their firearms. So renewals do get prioritised, and as of June, they were taking 55 days to turn those around. And for new grants of certificates, they now sit for June, that was taking 128 days. So it is a significant period of time. But I've visited the team, and I am really confident they are working flat out on this, but they are really focused on making sure the decisions they make are defendable and quality decisions.
Thank you, and useful to just understand those figures. And so I had an email from a resident this week who had applied in January for a renewal that was due in May, was given an extension to July, and has now got a 6-month temporary certificate until next January. And those kind of cases are not isolated in terms of some of the correspondence to my office. So how does that fit into those statistics that you've just gone through in terms of renewals in a 55-day timescale? Because obviously that's quite different to kind of almost 6 months before you get an extension.
Yeah, well, the data I've quoted clearly is an average across all the applications. Some of them take longer, some are dealt with more quickly through that. I don't know the detail of the case that you just described to me. It may be that there's particular complications or complexity with that one that needs working through. I know one thing the team does indicate that sometimes the individual applicants are not always providing all the information from the outset that the team needs in order to work through those applications. So on occasions, they do need to go back to people to ask for further information, for further details. Sometimes that might be details that are required from the NHS about particular conditions an individual may have, and obtaining that information at times can be time consuming. But we need it in order to be able to make full decisions through that. So certainly one thing I would ask is please make sure the applications are completed with as much information and all the questions are fully answered from the outset. And if we ask for further information, please get it back to us as quickly as you can. On occasions, they will use temporary certificates to help through a delay period. But I'm certainly asking that the teams correspond and keep informed people who have applications in as to exactly where their application is within that system.
That's welcome, thank you, because a number of the public comments have been around that communication and timeliness of updates. So I welcome that commitment. Final question for me on this. Looking at some of the data that my office has given me, it looks like 2024-25 is quite a high year in terms of renewals that are just in this kind of cycle, and are somewhat higher than the demand that the service was able to meet last year. So what confidence have you got, and might be around those additional resources that have gone in, that the service will be able to meet that increase in demand over the coming year compared to what was able to be got through last year?
Yeah, so we've, as I say, we've put more resources in there. So that's going to assist. You are right that the demand profile year on year varies over, I think it's a 5-year cycle. And that's something to do with the way firearms legislation has changed over the years that has generated some natural peaks within that. We've previously discussed with the Home Office whether they are prepared to help us smooth those out, and that's never been the case. So that is a profile that we have to work with. The additional resources will help, but as I say, the process they're working through is more detailed than previously we've worked through. So I don't think I can sit here and say we're going to be able to get those numbers all the way down. Ultimately, one of the decisions that I need to make is where I put all the resources that I have available to the Constabulary. And a challenge that I have around firearms licensing is that the fees that people pay for their certificates generally vary from somewhere around about £50 to £90 for a certificate. That in no way meets the costs that we have of maintaining the unit and processing through there. So, a discussion may well be, if we want to be able to put more resource into the system to process against these, there's a very real conversation I think we need to have with government about the cost of applying for these certificates. Because if not, I'm diverting resources from other functions in the Constabulary into this area. And as we've already discussed, there's plenty of other pressures elsewhere that needs me to apply that resource. But we keep it under check. One thing we are doing is, we're bringing in a new case management system, IT system, effectively into the team that will help us manage all the workflows within there. And I'm optimistic that that will help make the process we operate even more efficient, which should then reduce some of the timeliness or improve some of the timeliness issues.
Okay, that's useful, and I'm sure something we'll keep an eye on closely. Thank you very much. Chief Constable, that does bring us to the end of this first accountability and performance meeting. I hope members of the public watching have found it useful. The recording of the meeting and indeed a summary of it will be on the PCC website shortly, and our next meeting is Thursday, the 16th of August. Thank you very much.
Thank you.